Thank you, Brother Ginsburg. I don't think any of us will ever look at Moshe Rabbeinu the same again. Okay, before we take questions, just a few announcements in case people leave or leave the broadcast. The next one is April 2nd, the first Sunday in the month of April. It's Zion Nisan, the week before Pesach.
It's Vav, it's the sixth going into Zion.
Yeah, it's by daylight savings time it will still be Vav. Correct, by the end of the shiur it will be Zion. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Our two books on discount this month is The Wandering Jew. For those who don't know, this book is very, very different than any of the other books of the Rav. They're very, very short words of wisdom that came over Twitter. And they were compiled together, and it's really a very, very fascinating book, $10. And it's in Hebrew, but this is the book on Purim. This is also available here for the people here and also on the website. Before we take questions, first from people around the world and then people here in Yerushalayim, someone sent me a question and I wanted to make sure to get it in and asked me because they couldn't be here tonight. So the question was that one time you taught that Mashiach would dafka be married, and that in that relationship, we'll call it Mrs. Mashiach, will bring out the feminine aspect of the Mashiach, and the Mashiach will bring out the masculine aspect of his wife, which in essence is what happens to every couple. But the specific question was, in this dynamic, how does that relate to the situation in the world now where there is pretty pervasive sexual confusion about identity? It seems to be becoming a bigger and bigger issue. So how does this teaching, especially in relationship to Moshe Rabbeinu, who's separated from his wife. So how does this dynamic play itself out, and what can we learn about it today in the situation in the world today?
Okay, so Moshe Rabbeinu was separated from his wife according to the divine command, because he had to speak with God continuously, and he couldn't ever be in a state of impurity resulting from a marital relation. But that itself has to be rectified, and that's the Mashiach, that he will not separate from his wife. That's at the level of Yesod. That's what we spoke, that at the level of Yesod is called Ish. When he separated physically from his wife Tzipora, he married the Shekhinah. So in order to marry the Shekhinah, which is the congregation of Israel, he had to separate from his physical wife. But the Mashiach, not so. Since he is married to the Shekhinah and to his wife simultaneously, one does not contradict the other. We said that every soul has a right and a left to it. The right comes from Moses, and the left comes from Elijah, from Eliyahu Navi. It says that Eliyahu Navi had such tremendous, great beauty in his face. It says whenever a woman would look at his face, it's an amazing thing that also people don't know, this saying of the sages, that if a woman would look at the face of Elijah, she would die on the spot. Doesn't sound so nice. But that's what it says. Why? Because there's something about Elijah. He's the ultimate, the beauty. It says the beauty of the face which is a feminine quality. Women are beautiful, not men, are not supposed to be beautiful. If a man is beautiful, that itself is a feminine property. And a handsome male is his femininity. So actually everyone has in himself a male and a female, which right and left is also male and female. The beauty comes from the female element, and that's Moses and Elijah. Now the Arizal says also another very amazing thing. He says that the last generation of Mashiach, which is our generation, is a return of the generation of Moses, the Exodus, called Dor De'ah, the generation of knowledge. And the sign that we are now the Dor De'ah, the generation of knowledge, is that the women will control the men. So if you have a generation that has that sign to, just like it says that the sign of Mashiach himself is that he will judge by smell, not by sight. And so the sign of the generation of Mashiach, the Arizal says, is that women will control the males. Why so? It says because in the generation of Moses, next week we're going to read about the sin of the golden calf. Who contributed the gold to the golden calf? The males. Maybe they took by force from the females, but the females, the women, did not want to contribute. Did not want to give their precious jewelry and precious stones to the golden calf. And it says because of that, the generation, our generation, which is a return, a replay. So the women will be given the power to control the males. That's a concept. So we see there's something about the Arizal says something about called achlifu duchtayu is the term in Kabbalah. There's some male-female interchange of task. Specifically in this generation. So every phenomenon it can be good and it can be bad. It can be an elevation, which is called the elevation of the woman, or it can be a degeneration. Degeneration means come Dor is generation. So the negative phenomena that we see in our generation is a degeneration of this interchange between roles of male and female that the Arizal said explicitly. That's exactly the sign of this generation. I will say something else. It says that Moses was was mute. It says every generation when Moses returns, he begins as an ilem, as mute, that he can't speak. He needs Eliyahu to talk for him and to open his mouth. One of the tasks of Eliyahu is to open the mouth of Moses. What does that mean? It means that the woman now is Elijah, and the man is Moses. And Moses is mute. And to open his mouth, he needs his wife to open his mouth. So in order to open the mouth, she also has to have power, positive power over it, to give him speech. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for the time being.
Okay, that's a perfect lead into a question from Angela. You can say where from where. But she's asking if the soul of Moshe returns in every generation, does an anti-Moshe soul appear in every generation?
Right, so definitely, yes. We said that Moshe has several anti-souls. One at the level of Da'at is Bil'am. the prophet who is the antimatter or the antiparticle of Moses. Then the soul of Cain, the negative component of the soul of Cain, also has 3 levels to it. It is called the nefesh and the ruach and the neshama. The nefesh is that mitzri that Moses smote at the beginning of his career, the first story told about him. The nefesh means the viable soul, the animate soul, level of the soul. The spirit is the next level, the ruach, that's personified in the Torah by Korach, who opposed Moses. And the neshama, the more spiritual, and it's called the breath of the soul of Cain, is Jethro. It's actually his father-in-law who converted. So that Jethro, he didn't oppose Moses. In a very deep way he did. He opposed the way Moses was running the show. He told him, and Moses accepted his criticism. He was critical about the way Moses was judging the people. And he gave him good advice, and Moses accepted his good advice. That's a good counterpart. Many great tzaddikim used to look for somebody that could criticize them. But everybody has to have positive criticism. Sometimes that's the task of the wife. Everybody needs a critic. So Moses, his critic was his father-in-law. That was good. But he had a lower critic who was Korach, who was an opponent. And he had even a lower one, which is the Mitzri, which he called him his brother, because he was Cain, who once more persecuted the brethren of Moses, and Moses had to kill him to elevate him to the level of Jethro. So we already have 4 anti-Moses. Bilam and these 3. And the only good one is Jethro. So that I think relates to the question. It says one final thing. It says that in the generation of Mashiach, the Korach, all of these souls return in every generation. But the Korach, he has to acknowledge, that's called Hod. He has to acknowledge the truth of Moshe Emet v'Torato Emet, that Moses is true and his Torah is true. And when he acknowledges the truth, that's also one of the great signs of the coming of Mashiach, that Moses will now manifest as Mashiach.
Okay, a question from somewhere in cyberspace, that you mentioned that Moshe himself was the 7th manifestation of the soul of Moshe, and 7 is the letter Zion, and one of the meanings of Zion is a sword. So the question is, what is the connection between the letter Zion and the soul of Moshe?
So Zion is clay. Zion can be a sword, or not just a sword, a weapon in general. But Zion also, the secret of the letter Zion is Mirot Yisrael Nagen. Just like David is called the sweet singer of Israel. Of Moses, it is said in the Zohar that he knows the songs of all of the souls of Israel. That means that he can sing together all of the songs and every individual song of every Jewish soul. That's the sign that he is all-inclusive of all of the souls. Once more, Zion also has to do with a musical instrument. It says that Moses was a Levi. And there are 2 functions that the Levites perform in the temple service. One is that they open and close the gates. And the other is that they play the music and sing the songs. And it says that of those 2 functions, those 2 tasks, Moses was one of the singers. in the tabernacle that we read about in the last week's portion, this week's portion. So Moses was a singer. That's why the letter Zion, all the songs of the Torah begin Az Yeshua Moshe, Aleph Zion, 1 and 7. So one of the most important things about the letter Zion that it has to do with music, with song. 1/7 is like a musical scale. You have 7, every musical scale has 7 tones to it. And the 8th is just a replay, it's one octave higher or lower. But in different tones are 7. That's why 7 has to do with music.
Okay, the next question is from Robin from Los Angeles. And she's asking that the reason for the shiur today was because it was Zion Adar. Right. So Moshe is very, very connected to the month of Adar. And
Zion.
Yeah, also, yes. 7th of Adar. But her question is that the sign of the astrological sign for this month are fish. What is the connection between the sign of this month and Moshe? And putting those two together, the connection with fish, Moshe, and Purim. Good Purim!
So fish is we know that the astronomical or astrological signs of the zodiac also correspond to the 4 elements. They repeat themselves 3 times. And fish is obviously a water sign. So as we said before, Moses comes from the water. The fact that on this day of Zion Adar, Moses is both born and dies, or dies and is immediately reborn, that's just like the phenomenon of Netzach that we explained in the class before, that becoming pregnant and giving birth simultaneously. Becoming pregnant is actually the soul entering the grave, because the womb is referred to symbolically as the grave. Being born is coming back to life, like resurrection. So just like pregnancy and birth are simultaneous, relating to the soul of Moses, so is death and coming and being reborn. So once more, Adar and Purim is the Malamitam B'dat, Ad Lo Yada. Moses has a level of Dat, but in this week's portion, which is read always in the month of Adar, Tetzaveh, he goes up to the level of Ayin, which is above knowledge. There's no knowledge there. That's his ultimate source in Elohim, is Ayin. So once more, Purim is reaching that level of Ayin. Purim is, if Moses is born today, so when is his bris? His bris Milo, his covenant is on Purim. Just it says that he was born circumcised, but nonetheless, it says that hatafat tambris, when a child is born already circumcised physically, nonetheless a drop of blood is taken out of his bris on the 8th day, which is, the 8th day is adding 7 days to the day of his birth. So if his birth is the 7th, means that his bris is the 14th, which is, if today is Sunday, so his bris is next Sunday. So next Sunday Purim is the bris of Moshe Rabbeinu, which means called the hatafat tambri, taking out the drop of blood, because his foreskin is already not there. That's the way he was born. So all of these things have to do together. Also it says that Moses being born in the month of Adar is because he contains all of the 12 months in the writings of the Arizal. It says that every month has to do with one of the attributes of mercy of God. And all of them together shine in this month of Adar, especially if it's a leap year, but even if it's not a leap year. And that's the secret of Moses, that he is all-inclusive of all of the attributes of mercy, which also correspond to all of the 12 tribes of Israel. So all of the 12 tribes, the whole Jewish people, he is shakul, he weighs equally with all of the 12. And the fact that, what is the concept of dagim, of fish? Fish is called the concealed world, al-madid kasya. And that's where he comes from. He comes from the water. He himself is called a fish. Joshua, his student, his name is Yoshua bin Nun. He's not referred to as bin Nun, but he is Yeshua bin Nun. What does the word Nun mean? It means fish. So it says that Joshua is the son of the fish. It doesn't refer to his physical father. It refers to Moses. Because a teacher, a mentor, is a spiritual father. So Moses is that Nun, that fish, who is the father of Joshua. That's what's explained. So all of these things come together.
Could I just add that Nun is 50, and this is Moshe returning every 50 years. So Yeshua being Nun, because he carries on for Moshe. He's the next link. Yeshua being Nun. Okay, we're going to take some questions here, and since I'm here also, I have a couple of questions. So, you mentioned when you were talking about Moshe separating from his wife that he did it at a command of God because he had to be ready for a state of prophecy at all times. But it says in the Sechet Yevamot there were 3 things that Moshe did from his own dot. And one of them was that he separated from his wife, and that God agreed to it. So how do we understand that? In other words, whose initiative was it that Moshe separates from his wife?
Okay, so if Moses understood that if he, since he has to speak with God at every given moment, so he took initiative that he can't have marital relations because according to the halakha that makes him impure until he goes to the mikveh, and in that state he can't receive the word of God. So that was his initiative. He understood that because he knows he has to be ready to speak with God at every moment, and God agreed to that. That's why God commanded him after he thought of this, so God said yes, and he was told by God to do that. That's question number 1.
Questions here?
Just to follow on that, is this the month of Adar is also the tribe of Naphtali, where we hear about Hashem's messages through one another? So isn't the wife the ultimate kind of reflection of God's messages? And also sort of connect to Miriam and Moshe about how one can receive compassion through one another. Just about the two, how they connect. Receiving messages.
You want to repeat the question?
Yeah. Hopefully I'll get this one. The question is that this is the month of Naphtali, and Naphtali is kind of known as the messenger. Look on any mailbox or post office, and you have the sign of Naphtali as a messenger. And the question is, in relationship to Moshe, isn't a man's wife like the ultimate messenger of things that he should be aware of?
So this part is, you can just take this part by itself. It exactly fits what we explained, that Moses needs Elijah. That Elijah actually has to do with the wife. About Naphtali, it says Naphtali ayala shlucha. How is he referred to as a messenger? The sign that you see on the post box of a deer. That word for deer is ayala, which spells Elijah, Eliah. Shlucha hine anochi sholech lechem. He's sent. God sends Elijah. Means that he's sending this deer, which is Naphtali, to give the to give the good tidings of the redemption, and then the continuation of the verse reads, that he gives beautiful words. That's what we said before, that Moses needs Elijah to open his mouth. Because before Elijah comes as a messenger, which is actually the wife, to open his mouth, he's mute. So that's the first part. And there was another...
Say the second part again.
You're talking about Miriam and Moshe's interaction.
Right, yes,
compassion.
Right.
Just wondering how, there's a certain, there's a certain level of concealment and there's a certain level of revealment that we experience in our lives through one another. Just wondering if you can personalize, how we can personalize that, how that can be personalized.
Okay, the question was, going back to the relationship between Miriam and Moshe, and how there was this interplay of compassion, in the sense of one feeding the other with compassion. So, in the bigger question, how does that affect all of us, that dynamic?
Okay, the way to think of this is just everyone thinks if any one of us here has an older sister. It says that in general a person is very close, a male is closer to his sister than he is to his brother. It's even a mitzvah in the Torah to marry your sister's daughter, because the greatest love is between brother and sister, and you, according to the Torah, you're not allowed to marry your sister, but you can marry your sister's daughter, according to the Torah. So that's the ultimate match. Because, as we said before, marriage is the ultimate expression of compassion. That's from Yesod to Malchut. The origin of compassion is from Tiferet in Kabbalah to Malchut. So we would think maybe that Tiferet is older, because it's a previous Sphira above Malchut. But here we're saying that Malchut is older. At first you have the older sister, and she's looking over just like in a home. If you think of an older sister and a little baby brother. So the older sister feels just like the mother, that she now has this little baby that she has to hug and take care of. And that's exactly the story of Miriam. So just to imagine that state of an older sister with a little brother, that the little brother is the Redeemer. He's going to become higher, but right now he's just a little brother. And the older sister is above, but she's Malchut, she's the whole Jewish people. So that's something that if we meditate upon that, I think each one of us can feel that very deeply in our hearts.
Other questions? Okay, the question is, when Rabbi Ginsburg was going through the different reincarnations of Moshe, the question is, what about Mordechai of Yehudi? Purim is coming up.
Okay, so in every generation we have Moshe. It says that Mordechai in his generation was like Moses in his generation. That's what the sages say. But according to the Rizal, it doesn't mean that he's actually a reincarnation of Moses. It just means that he's like him. Maybe even, as we just before, Ramari mentioned that Joshua was the next leader of the Jewish people. He received from Moses. Why isn't he mentioned? It's not just because he lived in the same life. It's not an actual Gilgul, which is a reincarnation. It's enough to say that there was an Ibur, that after Moses passed away, his soul entered into Joshua. That's also good enough. Why isn't Joshua included? So it says that very often those souls which continue Moses are not from his side, but actually from the very opposite, from the other side. That Joshua is actually related to Elisha, who is related to Eliyahu, who is related to Cain. The Same about Mordechai. Mordechai has a very much gvura to him. Lo yichra v'lo yishtachav. He's not willing to bow down to Haman. So in a certain way, he's the Moses of the generation. But in this line that the Arizal that teaches us, he's not considered. He's not counted there as one of the essential reappearances of Moses. But in every generation, the great. If we skip from the Rashbi to Mashiach, so what about everybody in between? The Arizal was Moshe Rabbeinu, the Baal Shem Tov was Moshe Rabbeinu. In every generation there's a great Moshe Rabbeinu. But we have to try to understand there's something special about these 11 souls, or God and the 10 souls that we outlined. And much of this is coming from Kitvei Arizal.
Moshe Rabbeinu lived 120 years. So when he became 50 years old, Hashem already prepared to give him Moshe. So he prepared 50 years.
No, it could be that.
The question is that Moshe Rabbeinu lived to be 120, and yet we learned that every 50 years there's an appearance of Moshe. So the question is, when Moshe becomes 50, is there already another appearance of Moshe at the same time?
So just the opposite. The true appearance of Moses is that he was born as Moses at the age of 80. Until the age of 80, there was another Moses before him, which was his father Amram and his grandfather Kahat. So the previous appearances of Moses, while he was alive and he was born, but the Moses was still his father so long as the father was alive, and his grandfather so long as the grandfather was alive. Meaning that Moses had his 40 years of leading the Jewish people, so you have to add 10 years either before or after. That's in the 50 years of Moses per se. But definitely there's overlap of lives. Just if we mention this, so we'll say another thing. Which Moses are we right now? We said that there are 120 Moses until the end of the 6,000 years. But we are not yet at the end of the 6,000 years. So what Moses are we in right now? We're in the Chen. We're now in the 116th Moses appearance right now. So Mashiach, that's a good time for Mashiach to come. Chen.
La. Chen, la. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. They're not related. One is kind of technical, and the second one is not at all. The first question is, you talked about in Adam and Chava, that Chava would give birth right away after the translations. But by definition, that was a part of the sin, because they were not supposed to be together until Shabbos. So how could it be that she was conceiving immediately after they had sinned?
Well, let's do one at a time. The Rav taught that the pre-sin level of human beings was union led to birth immediately. No 9 months of pregnancy. So the question was, according to tradition, Adam and Chava were supposed to wait until Shabbos to have marital union, and that was part of the sin, is that they didn't wait. So how do we understand that they were still on this pre-sin level? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is a very good question, because it's actually a paradox. That all sin, and this, once for next week we're going to read about the sin of the golden calf, which is the all-inclusive sin of the Jewish people as a people. All sin means doing things prematurely. And there are three great sins that we understand throughout all of history. One is the sin of Adam and Eve, the primordial sin. That all mankind suffers the results of that sin, which is death. And then the all-inclusive sin of the Jewish people as a people, which is the golden calf, the topic of next week's Torah portion. And then finally the sin of the king, of David, who once more will return as the body of Mashiach, David and Bathsheba. Those are the three great sins. It says all these three sins is because they ate from the fruit prematurely. It's all sin has to do with impulsivity. That's the origin of sin, it says. And the expression is prematurity, that you do things before the proper time. Now, it says that Moses himself was once more. Moses is the secret of history from a perspective of above time. Once more, this was maybe the essence of our words this evening. That when you look at history as God looks at history from above time, that is the soul or the unraveling of the soul of Moses throughout history. Moses also did three things prematurely. And he suffered from them. The fact that he's a suffering soul throughout history is also because he did three things prematurely. The first is that he smote the Egyptian prematurely. He wanted to rectify him, but he was not ready to be rectified. The second thing is that he took out the Erev, the mass multitude of Egyptians that wanted to leave Egypt together with the Jewish people, and he accepted them as converts, en masse. And it says that he had very good intentions, but they were not ready yet to convert. They were souls that needed at some point in history to be converted, but he took them out prematurely. And the final thing is that he hit the rock when he was told to speak to it, but he did try to speak to it, just he missed the point, because another rock appeared, and he spoke to it, nothing happened, so he figured that maybe I have to hit it like the first time, in order for the water to come out of the rock, it has to be hit, so he hit it. It says that he should have still hold himself back. What does it mean to be impulsive? That you can't wait. You can't hold yourself back even for one moment. He still should have held himself back and spoken to the rock as he had been told, even if it would have taken some time. Now, what is the difference between the three times that Moses was impulsive and the three great sins of all of history? And they relate one to the other. The only difference is that sometimes a person is impulsive and does something prematurely, does something right prematurely. And sometimes you do something wrong prematurely. What do I mean by that? That to do something right prematurely means that you figure that even now, either now or never. What would have happened if someone would have come and told Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe he understood this himself, that now is not the right time to kill this Egyptian. Next week. He's not ready yet to be killed. Give him time. That's what it means, that the fruit was not ripe. So, but now he's hitting my brother. And now I see what he did to him last night, that he raped his wife. Now's the time. What is the thing like? It's just like in modern times, that if chas v'shalom there's some, God forbid, some act of terrorism, to react, either you react immediately to it in a very severe way, and that receives, or at least you think that that's going to receive public support, or you just miss the moment. So what if someone would come and say, no, wait a week, but But next week is not the time. I can't do it next week. That's called that you're doing something right. It still can be premature. The idea that we're trying to explain, which is the answer to the question, is sometimes there's a paradox that something on the one hand is premature, but on the other hand, it's now or never. So something good, which is premature, but it's now or never. So you have to decide. You're either not going to do it at all, or you're going to do it prematurely. If you do it prematurely, you know that you're going to suffer the results. The same thing taking out the mass multitude from Egypt. They weren't ready. It was premature. But what? Moses is going to leave Egypt so they'll just stay in Egypt. He's going to come back to Egypt to take them out next week, or next year, or another 40 years. Either now or never. The same thing hitting the rock. Hitting the rock, the people were thirsty. There was no water. You can die from thirst. It's a situation with SOS. I tried speaking for a moment. It didn't work. I need water. Now I need water. Not tomorrow. Not even an hour from now. In the meantime, someone will die. So the only thing I know to do is to hit the rock. Hitting the rock is coercing. The rock is a symbol of the Jewish people, it says. Hitting the rock is coercing Jews to keep mitzvot. When the Mashiach comes, it says that he will, Yaakov, he will influence us to keep mitzvot. That's the first thing the Mashiach has to do. You might think that he'll do it with the rod. But the Arizal teaches in Chassidut taught that that's exactly what's called the sin of Moses, that he hit the rock. You have to speak to the rock. What it means to speak to the rock? You have to soften the hardness of the rock by speaking sweet words. As we say very often that in our generation we have to teach Kabbalah and Chassidut before we teach Halakha. Because teaching Halakha and demanding Halakha from a secular public is called hitting the rock. But teaching Chassidut is called speaking to the rock. But it takes time. You have to be, to speak to the rock, you have to be ready for patience. You can't be impulsive. It's going to take time. To hitting the rock is called actually also conversing one's wife to relationship, which is a very, very negative thing. That's what the Arizal says. The relation between the leader of the generation and the people is like husband and wife. So that's why it says that hitting the rock of Moses is the origin of the sin of David and Bathsheba. That he ate her unripe. He almost raped her. That's hitting the rock. But taking out the mass multitude, that corresponds to the sin of the golden calf itself, which was the sin of the mass multitude. They were responsible for the sin. And the very first premature thing that Moses did is that he killed the Egyptian. That's the equivalent of Adam and Eve eating from the forbidden fruit. Why? He says that eating from the forbidden fruit is the origin of one of the 7 commandments of Bnei Noach, of the children of Noach, not to tear off a limb from a living animal and consume it. And that fruit from the tree is like the living animal, and taking off that fruit prematurely is is it's called Aver Min HaChai. And that's what Moses did when he smote the Egyptian prematurely. So it's the three correspond to the three, but in the case of Moses, we explained before, it was this paradoxical state of emotion that either now or never, and he accepted the consequence. The consequence is that he's going to suffer for it. And that's called doing something right prematurely. But the other is doing something wrong prematurely. Nonetheless, they relate to one another. So actually, now all of this was to address your question that you asked, is that Adam and Eve, definitely there can be two paradoxical, antithetical acts that on the one hand, the relationship was not the way it should be. It was premature. And that's part of the sin, as you said. Nonetheless, their impulsiveness, they could have waited. It's not like Moses said he could either now or never. They could have waited, but they didn't have that, what's called gadlut mochin, the greatness of consciousness or mind. They didn't have the frame of mind which is sufficient to have them wait until Shabbat, until it's no longer premature. So even though it's a paradox, it's an existent paradox of something right and something, what is right? Right is the relation per se, there's nothing wrong with the relationship. And there's something wrong that was premature, and in their case, they could have waited. It's not a now or never situation. But nonetheless, what we're trying to say is that paradox in such cases exists. Sometimes you can do something wrong and right at the same time.
Okay, the powers that be tell us that our time is up, but I absolutely have to ask this last question based on what you just said.
Now or never.
Yes, it is now or never. Exactly. Having given that incredible answer, so how do we understand the whole concept of Be'ita Achashana? That Mashiach will come in its time, and I will quicken it. But really the question is more we want Mashiach now. Is there a price to pay for that? But also, how do we understand, how do we answer those that might say, we shouldn't have come back to Israel in the last 100 years. We should have waited. It wasn't time yet. And others said, no, it's now or never, especially after the Shoah. There was this feeling, it's now or never. So how do we apply that to our reality today?
Okay, so it's definitely it's the most pertinent thing to contemplate. And there still are people that say that it's positive or negative. And you still have two opinions. You don't want to say who's right and who's wrong. I don't want to take sides now. The whole idea is that you can have two things, a right and a wrong, simultaneously, and do not deny or negate the element which is right. So if you're talking about returning now to Zion, to Israel, in our generations, definitely there's a right to it. Just like we have the right to be here, we did the right thing. But it could be that there were wrong intentions, and there still are wrong roots, intellectual. It's called hashkafa, the way that it's related to secular disbelieving beliefs. So you can have both at the same time. But again, I did not do justice to your question. It requires much more deeper contemplation, understanding. There is much more to be said, but not right now.
Okay, I will just point out, though, we are broadcasting from Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh.
Mm-hmm.
But right, we are here. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, first Sunday of April, April 2nd, Vav Nisan going into Zion Nisan. Everyone should have a Purim Sameach.
Purim Sameach.